So I'm back out here in the front yard today, and it's extremely bright and sunny, so my apologies for obviously filming at the perfect time of day here, but I wanted to go over first a couple of the common questions, or I guess comments on the last video about this project, show you a few more clarifications on a few things, and then we're going to see, I did a few test spots out here with my Ventrac and the power rake on that, and I'm going to go through the rest of this and try to remove as much of this debris as possible, show you that process. We're also going to do an update on that little project, the little tiny lawn project I have going with 100% Kentucky Bluegrass. We're about, today is day 8, and we have some pretty good growth over there, so I'll show you that too. But first, let's get to this front yard. All right, so we talked about sort of what happened in this area. There was a lot of construction traffic when we were building our house right in this area, but also this was quite a bit lower than where it was to grade right now. We had a huge pile of topsoil sitting over there, and then that all got pushed back over onto here. So there's definitely a lot of topsoil here. So when I talk about that this maybe gets compacted, it's not exactly in the traditional sense that you would think, like try to put a screwdriver in here and you can't even put it in the ground. So I'll show you in a second with my soil probe how far I can get into the ground here. We have a very unique soil that I have never really dealt with, much different than where I came from over at our other old house. What happens is when it's wet, and when it gets wet, it's really easy to crumble and really easy to break apart, and it's really great soil. It's kind of on the slightly sandier loam side. As it dries out, there's probably just enough clay in there and just enough mixed with that sand that it gets hard as a rock sometimes. This channel back here where all of this water flows, especially when we have flooding, I've had die out of the grass there just because after things are so saturated and so soaked for a while, they dry out, it gets absolutely hard as a rock, and then there's nothing that can really live in that. So it's a very unique situation. That's probably part of some of the things that I had going on here, and like I said, the dry conditions that we had for those couple seasons. But now we've had so much rain, so much water, that this should be totally soaked well down into the root zone. So this was an area right here that I had scraped off a bunch of the grass. I mean, you can see that we have good black soil here all the way. I'm basically getting to the clay part of the soil as I hit there. So that's the 6-inch mark here. So we're at probably about 8 inches here before I'm even hitting any of the heavier clay stuff. Now, there is, like I said, clay in here, but it's a good mixture. And I also have grass roots that are down at the bottom of this. So it's not like all of the grass was just sitting on top, because I did test with my soil probe over those few seasons where it looked really, really good. Multiple times I will use this to go out and see where the moisture is in the soil profile. And so I had done that and noticed that I had roots all the way down there, and I still have grass roots in these. But you can see this is wet now. So it does have some clay in it, but it breaks apart nicely, and there's space in there for everything to grow. So this isn't in the true sense of when I said it was compacted. It's not like I can't get a screwdriver in here or a soil probe or anything. So it's just merely now, I think, getting this off of here, deciding if I'm going to keep any of the grass after I probably aerate this really, really heavily. After we get some grass growing and into next season, I'm going to be a little more determined to get some wetting agent on here consistently, try to push that water through the profile and have the grass roots go down and search for that. Also, I'm probably going to utilize plant growth regulator a little bit more here. I've seen the benefits of it down on my golf green. I used to use it on my front yard back at the other house, and I've sort of gotten away from it in a sense just because I have so many areas to cover, and it is an expensive product, but I think specifically out here that would help me too, because it's doing less of that top growth, putting more of the energy down into the root system, and it also helps me so I don't have so much to mow, because I would love to reel mow this again. I'm hoping that I can, but in the past I've just run out of time. So if I get the PGR on there and I can do that consistently, then I might be able to do this the way that I want to in the future. So the other consistent comment was, this looks like some sort of grub damage, and I've looked over various places here. I have not seen any grubs out in this section, And so maybe there are some here or there, probably, but as far as what caused all this to look the way that it is that extreme thatch level that I had, and then, like I said, this year letting it completely essentially be on its own. This is exactly what a ryegrass lawn looks like basically when it dies off, and that's a bunch type grass, so that's all you're seeing are those little tiny bunches that survived. The rest of it did not survive, and when you have a bunch type grass like that, it very much looks like this when it dies off. Yes, that would probably also be similar in the sense of some grub damage might have a similar look to this, but this is a thatch and ryegrass dying issue over here. All right, so here is where I tested yesterday, and now I've let it dry out just a little more today, but I took my power rake with the Ventrac, which you'll see in a second, ran it through here to just kind of scuff off the surface as much as I could. But what that kind of shows you here is that the majority of all the rest of it is off there, at least enough for me to do the aeration. And there's just some spots where it kind of sticks, the thatch just sticks around some of those plants right through there. But that aeration is going to come through, and as long as I do a bunch of passes, we're going to punch through all of that stuff too. That's basically my only option that I could think of equipment that I have that might help me get the rest of this stuff off of here. Now, the only thing that I don't really love about that for this process is that it's not like a tiller where you're bringing all the stuff up and it just sort of sits on the surface there until you get it smoothed out. This is made to do that smoothing process at the same point. It kind of pushes and compresses the soil after it goes and cultivates things, and then it's made to smooth it all out again. So the only bad part about that for this sense is that I'm kind of compressing and slightly compacting that top of the surface here again, which I don't really want to do, but that's where the aeration is going to come in to make sure that I'm punching back through that layer and trying to smooth that out. So right before I get to the last pass here and cover this up, I just wanted to show you, this was an area that I was talking about where a lot of times the grass dies off because it's the low spot and it gets hard as a rock. But you can see it looks similar to the way that the power rake looked with those basically verticut lines, except we're not using a cutter right here. We're using just those little tiny nubs on that power rake to bring that through here. It just creates that. So is every single little bit of thatch off of here? No. I mean, there's a little bit here. Like I said, there's some here and there, but I'll probably try to get this cleaned up and then go in a few more directions, or at least one more direction. That should clean it up as much as possible, but as I said too, it does kind of compress down the soil a bit on those areas, and this is definitely still really wet. Okay, so here's where we ended up yesterday, or sort of what the process ended up like. Essentially, I used that blower to get all of the big stuff off of here into one big pile as much as I could. There was just so much debris that I ended up getting out my skid loader and just pushing all of that into a big pile here at the end. So I didn't do any turning on the yard, I just went in straight lines, backed up, and so that didn't do a whole lot of damage to it, but I just could see that the process was going to take forever to try to pick that all up by hand. The blower was only getting so much of the material, and then there was still quite a bit there left on the surface, and so after that my wife was kind enough to help out here, use the Time Master to bag up the rest of what was on the surface. That was a very dirty and dusty job, because this is pretty much now Very similar to the dustiness of peat moss, if you've ever used that. That's kind of what it looks like here on the surface now of what's left of that organic matter that's there. Similar really to what peat moss is. That was a very, very dirty mess. And now I still have just a little bit left on the surface. So I think I'd like to come in and I'm either going to hand rake the rest of that off here, or I had one more idea. I do have a little paddle. I don't know exactly what you call this tool, but the Milwaukee quick lock system that I have has this little paddle thing that's supposed to help clean rocks or other things off of grass. And so I'm going to try it on here and see if I can push the rest of this all to the end here, put it in a line and pick up the rest, and then I should be pretty good. Now what I've learned is that because there was all that thatch on there, what does thatch do? Well, it helps to hold onto moisture because of that organic matter. So especially down in some of those low sections, is still very, very wet. So likely, I'm probably gonna wanna let this dry out just a bit before I go into the aeration portion. So this is just the little paddle tool I was talking about. So it is kind of a workout to run it just because it wants to grab into the ground, and that's why I don't use it a lot for many things, but it looks like it will work for this. Just be prepared to get your heart rate up. So we're also keeping all this dead material to use somewhere down by the garden. Eventually either till that in or do something with it down there, maybe compost pile or something. So there was a lot of material, so you could see on that pile we had quite a few trips down there, and I've just got about one trip left, and this thing will be as clean as it's gonna get for right now. All right, so now we turn our attention really quickly to this front yard tiny lawn project that I'm calling it. This is 500 square feet of my elite Kentucky bluegrass. We're on day 10 today. We have some pretty impressive results as far as being on day 10 for bluegrass, and also I was pretty concerned as far as how much rain. We had 4 inches of rain in between when I planted this and now. Not 4 inches total, but one time of 4-inch rain, very, very heavy. And so this kind of shows the importance of having some sort of cover on this. And I used to use a lot of light materials, whether that be a little bit of topsoil or peat moss or something like that, and they just don't end up holding up whatsoever in that type of rainstorm. And so that's why I've moved to these straw blankets, or some people use easy straw or some of the loose straw, but I find that it's easier to use these just because you have a uniform thickness. It's harder to get those light straw products on evenly. Sometimes you have some piles in some sections, sometimes you don't have enough. At least that's been my experience with them. I like these because of them being even. However, like I showed in the video when I put these down, there's a few spots in these that were a little bit more bare on the straw. And you can actually see that visibly now on how the grass is coming in on those spots compared to some of the areas. So if you see this spot here where we don't have much straw, there's very likely some of the seed washed away here, but also you don't get as good of germ on those areas either. And then you compare that next to a spot that has a lot more straw, you can see how much more thick the grass came in there, how much more of those grass blades are showing and are sticking up. And so this area stays fairly wet, so I'm actually down to watering this once a day right now. Even today I have not watered at all, and it's still wet from yesterday. This is on the east side of our house, and our building here is about 35 feet tall to the peak. And so this is already starting to be shaded at about 2 p.m. And so that's why you have to really, really watch your watering now. It gets to a very key point here. We're getting into the 90s again for this weekend coming up, and 70s at night. And that is what I talked about when you plant early, is you have to be very, very careful with your watering. So I need this to dry out just slightly before we get into those evening hours, and watch it very, very closely. If it looks like it's going to be wet, or there's any rain in the forecast coming up where it's going to be sitting wet overnight, then that's a time when I would spray mefenoxam on this. It's going to prevent the pythium and the dying out of these new seedlings when they're in a very fragile state. So I'm going to watch this closely coming up. Watch your watering very, very closely, but because this is also shaded, because it's on the east side of our house, it does not get that intense afternoon sun over here. And so those are all things that when people say, well, how much should I water, how many times a day, when, all of that, it's very case dependent on your soil, on where it's at, sunlight, all of that stuff. So you kind of have to watch that closely on your own and come up with your own plan there. But I'm very happy with where this is at. I don't think it'll be too long now before the blankets will come off, and then I will begin hopefully being able to mow in the next couple weeks and seeing how this whole thing looks. Not really a lot else going on with it right now except watching it closely for those things, making sure I'm taking care of it the best that I can, but we have a really good start here. Coming up in the next episode, we're gonna find out if it needs a full till, if the power rake on my Ventrac will be able to get down into the soil and work it a little bit, or if the aeration might be the key to getting these next steps done on this front yard. But we're gonna find out. Stay tuned for all of that. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.